All right, the last few pages of this textbook tackle family communication. The sad part is we don't really get to dive in. If you were a graduate student in the field of communication like me, you can take an entire semester on family communication. Very few things affect how we show up and interact with people in the world like our family communication. So I really want you to take a minute, look, dig deep, watch the videos provided in this section, look at the articles. It's so powerful. We want to look at three things that sort of say, here's how we know that these people are family. The disclaimer is, and you all know this to be true, you don't have to be biologically related to call someone family. You just need, you ready? Number one, if you're taking notes, shared affection. That you really love these people and they really love you. Number two, shared resources. They provide for you. If you needed a coat, they would give it to you. If you need food, they would bring it to your door. So shared affection, shared resources. Last one, that you perceive them as family and they perceive you as family. When we moved to Houston almost 20 years ago, all of our family was 1,000 miles away. We didn't really know anybody and we were trying to build a life. And we met this sweet family and they had this older couple. They had kids about our age, and one of our first holidays here, they said, would you like to come? We're grilling hamburgers. We'd love to have you come. And that began a tradition that for years and years, we would come and experience this holiday with them, and they treated us like family. And years after we'd been coming to this barbecue, one of the daughter-in-laws of the older couple, she said to me, she said, on the way here, my daughter was saying, the butchers are going to be there. And they said, one of the siblings said, that's not our last name. Remind me who they are. And her daughter said, there are sort of distant cousins. And I thought, we've spent enough time, shared affection, resources, and now they perceive us as family. We perceive them. All right, we're going to look at a couple areas, parenting and sibling. Again, this textbook doesn't even hardly scratch the surface, but I'm going to include one of my favorite TED Talks in this module on building connection in parenting. It's so powerful. But let's look at specifically family communication patterns. As you're taking notes with this chapter, I want you to highlight, this is the one that I grew up in. And to remember that if that is the pattern you grew up in, that's your normal, but it doesn't have to be the one you establish. So we have a conversation pattern. When you have a family communication pattern that is conversation oriented, it means that parents look at kids and say, what do you think about that? We can discuss that together. It's really powerful. And it develops some emotional resilience and voice resilience in the children. What happens is, if you go into a classroom and you have a professor that's considered an authority, and your communication pattern in your home was conversational, you're more willing to ask a question when you don't understand. And so that's why it can be really helpful. When my grandfather passed away, we found an English paper he had to write for his freshman year of high school. This is 1935. And he had to write what he would do career-wise, but he also had to describe his family and what his family dynamic would look like. And he said, I want to have 4 children, and I want to have a monthly meeting, and I want everybody to share what they think about the rules and how things would go. And I thought, in 1935, for a male to say, I want my kids to feel like they're at a round table, like at Knights of the Round Table, that we're one among equals, was revolutionary for that time. And when he passed away, his children wept, not just like they'd lost a father, compass, but like they'd lost a friend. The second one that you'll see in your textbook is conformity, and this is just what it looks like, is that kids conform to whatever their parents think or believe. This is not necessarily a bad thing, and it doesn't mean that conversation's never part of the process. But we do see in conformity, when there's a high trust level, when kids perceive that their parents are for them, then it's easier for them to conform, which seems like not like rocket science. That seems like common sense, but it's important that we see that. Carl Jung, the psychologist, said that nothing will affect the life of the child like the unlived or unresolved life of the parent. So sometimes when we have our kids do things, it's because we wanted that as a child or because we didn't make the team, so we're going to push them a little bit harder. And then kids perceive that we're not for them. So we want to be careful in that process. All right, there are a couple different parenting styles, and I want you to think, what's the style I fell under, I grew up with, and then if I had my own family, what would I want that to be? The pros and cons. Authoritarian is very simply the my way or the highway. You do this because I said so mentality. Authoritative is that ultimately I make the final decision, but I'm going to ask you to be a part of the conversation or the process. And finally, permissive is what I call the free range parenting, like free range chickens. You just kind of do whatever you want to do. All things are permissible. All things are on the table. There's some obviously cons to that, and it can create problems with boundaries. So that is kind of the 10,000 foot view of parenting relationships. Please watch the TED Talk with Dr. Becky Kennedy in this module. I think you'll find it really, really powerful in a specific communication strategy that she provides. Okay, we're getting close to the end. We're going to look at sibling relationships. Some of you may not have siblings, but you may have people that feel like a brother or sister in that process. So I want you to think through who's like a sibling if I don't have one, and then I want you to look at these and categorize your siblings. You may be in a family where you have one type of sibling relationship with one of your siblings. Maybe you're close to your sister, but not to your brother, or vice versa. So let's look at these. Supportive. Supportive is just like it sounds. We're for each other. I want to help you. It's a really healthy trust. They have high trust level, and it's a strong one. Longing is often seen in siblings who are maybe far apart in age. So maybe there's a 7-year gap or a 10-year gap. They have a high respect for one another. I have a brother who's off doing great things. I admire him, I respect him, I don't necessarily know him. So that's what we would consider a longing relationship. Competitive, just like it sounds. When we hear parents use terms like this kid is my favorite, or children perceive there to be a favorite in the family, it creates a competitive relationship. And I don't think parents always know that they're doing that, but it can feel like I'm fighting to be the favorite. Apathetic relationship. This is what I call Christmas and Easter. These are the sibling relationships where we don't really talk. We don't hang out, but we spend time on holidays and I call them on their birthday. That's an apathetic relationship. And finally, a hostile relationship is really hostile. It means you can't hardly be together without a fight breaking out. We tend to see this in younger siblings, obviously, but one person often triggers the other, and a lot of times hostile relationships are birthed out of maybe some trauma, or again, competitive relationships can turn into hostile. But I want you to think about your siblings. Where do they fall? So if you were to categorize your relationship with your siblings, where do they fall? I hope that you have found this chapter interesting. We have blitzed friends and family. These are concepts and theories and understanding that I hope you take to heart, because we want to have healthy friendships and we want our families to have healthy communication dynamics. It's so very important for the well-being, not just of us, but of our society as a whole. I'm going to end with one of my favorite quotes from former First Lady Barbara Bush, who focused so intensely on her family. And she said in a commencement address in 1993, "Our success as a society and as a nation does not depend on what happens inside the White House, but what happens inside your house." I hope you've learned some things to help the communication where you live to be just a little bit better, a little bit stronger.